we are providing the industry with a TV attribution platform.
Hi, my name is Omer Jelani, and I'm VP of Sales for Barometric. We're based in New York City, and we provide advanced cross-device, cross-environment measurement and tracking solutions for brand agencies and publishers.
Okay, guys, so I'm going to start off. Joe Marchese, who runs advertising at Fox, has been saying for a while now that attention is the real measure of advertising, and we should be looking at at the sort of amount of attention that you're able to capture from an ad, not just if anybody's seen it. Now, Tom, you ran a bunch of TV stations for a while, and you've had a bunch of other stuff. I mean, does that sound right to you? Is that even feasible?
No, I like where Joe's going with it, right? It really is about attention. I think it really puts focus on the creative, which I think in a lot of the discussions here, we spend a lot of time on media and where it's placed and what platform it's on versus how does creative resonate. And so I do think I think it's one measure. I don't think it's the only measure. And so I think they're on the right track. And I think the key is how do you execute on that is really where the rubber meets the road.
Right. John, do you?
Yeah, sure. Joe and his team they're super smart, and I think attention obviously is a place where TV can win against some of their digital competitors. So I think that's great. I do think it's to be determined how you measure that attention, how you create a repeatable metric that the agencies can understand. There's a company, T-Vision, up in Boston, who we've partnered with very recently, where they're actually doing eyes-on-screen attention.
Yeah, talk to that guy. It's
a really interesting company. They have a panel where they actually provide you with a camera that you put on your television, and you've opted in. You want to be a panelist, and they actually are able to look at who's in the room. They don't bring back the actual video. It all gets boiled down to bits and bytes, ones and zeros that they actually transmit back to their infrastructure. But they're able to actually look at who's watching the TV. So they can score the programs, the ads for attention, which I think is really interesting, and it's actual eyes-on-screen attention. There are other folks who've tried to score attention based upon the viewing data that's collected from smart TVs or set-top boxes. And that's interesting, but it does have the problem that kind of the opposite thing could lead to a good score. Like if you were distracted and on your phone while the TV's playing and you're not touching your remote control, you could get a high attention score. Or you could have left the room and not touched your remote control and gotten a high attention score. So I really like what the guys at T-Vision are doing.
Yeah.
We've partnered with them so we can bring their attention scores into our attribution platform so that we can see attention and how does that affect the actual product sales or website visitations on that path to purchase.
Right. Now, I'm really curious because I had talked to that guy, and it's funny, in another life, I was an advertising creative director, and about 20 years ago, there were companies that used to take both TV commercials and print ads that would claim they could see where your eye went first, and that's how they would judge the creative on it. And so I was like, wow, this is an evolution for television. So now, Omer, you guys come at it from, where are you guys on attention?
Yeah, so I guess where we come at it is we're trying to measure all marketing touch points. So whether it's an upper funnel engagement like TV or video in the digital space, or something more lower funnel that might be a search ad that's sort of at the bottom of the funnel. So from our perspective, I think some of the intention metrics, they make sense. But when you talk about engagement, share of time and attention, they're can be fuzzy, and I think John mentioned, like, if you can build a consistent metric, that everyone's working off of, that is industry-wide, then I think it makes sense. But, everyone can kind of come at it their own way and build a story for themselves. So from our standpoint, like, we want to measure that and sort of show or demonstrate that entire path, consumer path, from the upper funnel engagement to the lower funnel conversion.
Right. So now it's interesting. We're talking about, I was talking about my previous life as a creative director. One of the things I've often wondered with measurement is that different ads have different purposes, and a lot of times the way we're looking at them doesn't always seem to correlate to them. So you've got what they call branding ads, like the Nike Just Do It, where the purpose really isn't to sell the product, it's just to make you think good things about Nike, so that in 2 years, if you go to buy a new pair of running shoes or a new basketball, you'll think Nike. Then there's other stuff that's aimed, say, product as Nike has a new woman's running shoe, they want to sell that. And then there's direct marketing where, hey, Nike has a new woman's running shoe and buy it now. So do you think we need different types of measurement depending on the purpose of the ad rather than, right now we seem to be very focused on the media that it's in. Like, is it a TV commercial? Is it a digital ad? Should we be looking at that more holistically and what's the purpose of the ad? And John, I know you guys are doing the attribution, so I'll let you take that one first.
Sure. Yep. Brand equity is certainly important, and it's something that gets built up over time. The challenge that CMOs are facing today, or the shelf life of a CMO, is very short, and they're being judged by results. And so more and more CMOs are getting pushed to put up numbers, and brand equity that is being built up so that a 10-year-old buys a Porsche when he's 40 years old is really hard when you're a CMO, because you're placing a really long bet. It's important, and there are companies that specialize in measuring brand equity that's built up over time. It's basically survey companies, Millward Brown being one of them, but does a really good job on that front. My company is more focused in on the attribution and trying to figure out what's driving more sales, more website visits, more store visits for somebody like a Nike, which is certainly more short-term in duration, but we do take ad stock into account. Our model is based upon awareness is built up when you see an ad, and that awareness decays over time. It basically has a decay curve associated with it. And that decay curve is different for the product, for the offer, for the company. And that decay curve does capture the brand equity that's built up over time for that particular brand through that campaign.
Cool.
Yeah, I would agree. And, I think you have to sort of capture all touch points. Again, what we're sort of focused on, and knowing that different touch points serve a different purpose. But for Nike, if there's a Just Do It ad out there, we want to eventually be able to say, hey, this household was exposed, or this device was exposed to that message from an upper funnel standpoint. And then were they exposed to more mid funnel or lower funnel tactics as well? So we want to try to paint the full picture of that path, knowing that every sort of tactic has a different place. And from our standpoint, we're trying to sort of capture every creative execution and sort of the role that it's playing in the performance, ultimately, of driving someone to visit retail or to make a purchase online, or in that regard.
Yeah, from a media owner perspective, it is important, right? Because we do know, we talked about the customer journey or the funnel, and we do know that look, there is a process there. So branding is key. We saw some of that happen with some of the digital issues last year with fraud and what people saw, kind of falling off, and now the importance of branding. So, and I agree with you, right? A lot of this is kind of long-term, short-term. Attribution's been an issue for 50 years or more in advertising, and the tools are getting better thanks to guys like these and companies like these. But to lose sight of what the top of the funnel is, and I think it has to be holistic.
Right. So do you guys though think that we should start, providing metrics, like, agencies should say, okay, this is a branding ad, this is a product ad, and we should look at, provide metrics both ways, or is it just too tough to do something like that?
So we'll do attribution at the top of the funnel as well as at the bottom of the funnel, which helps measure the brand equity. So for instance, if you see an ad for a car, you might go look at that car on the website. It's, you see the ad for the car, you probably Google the car, you go to the website, and then you're seeing the car, you're configuring the car, you're perhaps clicking on the dealer locator. Those are all really interesting outcomes that you can measure that can be tied back to whether or not that household saw the TV ad. So that's not bottom of the funnel purchasing the car, it's not automotive registration data, but it is a really good upper funnel indicator of interest. So for somebody who might not be familiar with those, so top of the funnel basically means just sort of the very first time they show a vague interest? Yeah, it's kind of like awareness, loosely, awareness, intent, desire, purchase. And there's different words that people will substitute in for that, but that's the basic funnel. Right.
Yeah, and there's been some research, and I don't have permission to share the case study, so I don't know specific, but, with addressable, and, do you replace everything addressable and really over-target? And there's been a couple of advertisers that have done some studies and in looking, there is from a return standpoint and an activity standpoint, going back to the build the car page, right, which certainly from an auto manufacturer standpoint is a key action. Build the car, get to that page, and then bring the customer through. There have been research studies done where all addressable versus brand and addressable. The brand and addressable has looked at basically a 20% lift versus brand alone, a little more dramatic with addressable alone. And the idea is really kind of the balanced approach. And again, this holistic idea of appealing to a customer and making sure that you're not only getting today's sales, but you're also setting up for tomorrow. So right. Because one of it's sort of a funny line I had gotten was when we were doing a project about addressable from some an older ad sales guy. He said, look, he goes, if I'm Mercedes, I want to put my ads in front of a guy who will never in his life be able to afford a Mercedes. You know why? So that when his brother-in-law buys one, he'll be impressed. And and there's something to that. There's something to that. So, the overall branding. Now, but that's actually a good segue into the next piece, which is, how much weight should measurement play on creative? I mean, I was talking before about, the eyes on the screen and all that. Like, should we sort of, there's a lot of sort of creative A/B testing, and agencies get completely flipped out about that because they're like, you can't tell. Stuff needs time. A lot of hit TV shows had terrible ratings their first year, blah, blah, blah. But how much and where should we start applying metrics, Omer, in terms of what creative units we're using?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, our focus is to be able to provide a performance score, if you will, for each and every creative execution. So they're all tagged separately. And again, depending on what the KPI or the conversion metric is, we can see in real time which pieces of creative are driving the highest percentage of conversions. Now, what we do with that is, potentially build out segments, audience segments, layering on demographic, psychographic, geographic information on those creative executions to provide more intel for brands to say, hey, listen, not only is this creative execution working, but here's that audience that it represents, and here's the conversion rate, if you will. So providing them some more insights, some more intelligence so they can get smarter on the fly for their next campaign, or even optimizing the current campaigns that they're working with. Yeah, I think I said when we first did the first question is this idea of dynamic creative and the ability to use creative as an additional tool to help the media be more effective is absolutely critical. How do you measure it? I still think that the jury's out on kind of the best way to do it and what overemphasis. But both with serving on the digital side, serving dynamic ads and with the kind of addressable and the VOD, the ability to do dynamic ad insertion, I think is a great opportunity. The key is I think you have to balance this level of specificity with, a general brand campaign. And I think that's where, going back to the execution, I think that's the important part of this.
Yep. So my company's Data Plus Math. So obviously I like the data, I like the analytics. When we look at creatives, we look at them through the lens of how they performed. We'll look at creatives, how many conversions we think the creatives drove, how the creatives performed on different networks and different day parts and different environments. And when you have a large matrix of viewing data combined with outcome data, you can tease out how the creatives performed. And you could see the creatives perform over time. You can see creatives wear out. You can see when they introduce new creatives how results perhaps tick up or tick down if the creative is a dud. There might be other subjective measures to creative, but when it comes down to getting people to go to your website, getting people to go to your store, getting people to purchase your product, that stuff is actually, that's slow pitch softball for attribution. Like that's right in our wheelhouse to measure that sort of stuff.
Right, and I've always been surprised because, I can see, TV commercials, there's a big difference. It's 30 seconds. It takes a lot of time. But I've always been surprised at how much difference there is even in search advertising. Like just, putting the words in different order can give you a 20% lift. And, and it happens across the board. And you wouldn't think that would matter that much, but it does, which is kind of crazy. Now I want to talk about just actually another Joe Marchese thing, which is how how much advertising is thrown at us and limiting it. Now, it's always been surprising, whether it's on TV or on the web, that advertisers don't seem to think that there's a value in being one of a few. Like on TV, why wouldn't it would seem to me anyway to be more logical to be one of 4 advertisers on a show like Modern Family than be one of 14 advertisers. Why do you think, Tom, that brands are so reluctant to pay for that, to pay more money for that?
Yeah, because I don't necessarily think the efficacy has been proven, right? I think we've seen that. I think it feels good, intuitively. Let's cut down clutter. But then you start getting into your CMO, and you've got, hey, look, my creative's good, my brand is strong. I'm not afraid to go into that competitive mix. And we know, we focus on TV, but if you look at some of the other media, right, that's out there, whether it be digital, whether it be traditional print, there's always this idea of clutter, right? Which now goes back to me, the effectiveness of not only the media and the holistic campaign, but what happens on the creative side, and are you targeted correctly? So I think with all of that, I think it's tough for somebody to say, I'm just going to pay more to be less, unless it's a marquee sponsorship, right? If you're sponsoring a particular show, and we've seen this happen, which I do think is particularly effective, is when you start building creative, in the more native creative with shows. So you're seeing that with some sitcoms and some entertainment. Right. You're seeing that with specials, and that application to me, I think, is very valid. And by the way, I think you're seeing people pay for that. So
yes.
Yeah, I would just add to that. I fully agree with Tom. You see the American Idols, The Voice, or Augusta just last week, where you have a finite amount of premium sponsors that are paying a premium, but they have a true ownership position, and they're willing to pay the premium. And then I would imagine most brands don't necessarily see the value, because it hasn't been proven, of paying that huge premium to be one of 4 on a premium content platform.
Right, but even on the web too, if you've got eight banner ads on a page versus 1 or 2, I find I'm much more prone to look at the 1 or 2 and remember them than like, oh my God, another one, make it go away.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, to me, it just sounds like an optimization problem. Like, there's a number of minutes that probably is the right number of minutes where the consumer is less likely to skip, and they're more likely to watch, and they're more likely to remember. And I think it's a great problem to throw data and math at. Not necessarily my company, but it's a great problem for analytics. Is 2 minutes the right number? Or it certainly sounds better than 16, 17 minutes of ads from a consumer standpoint. But are you really going to be able to increase the value of those spots by the multiplier you need to be made whole as a programmer by reducing your inventory? It's tough. With TV viewership and cable subscriptions trending down, right? You have less inventory. To then magnify it by taking away avails, you're really decreasing the amount of impressions you have to sell. So it's a bold move. I think that as a consumer, I love the idea of fewer commercials, but I think time will tell if the numbers add up.
Right. That really seems to be the thing, is finding that sweet spot of, because there's a thing, and you guys may have encountered this if you've ever done any kind of public speaking class or anything like that, where the guy, they'll say, somebody will throw one pencil at you and say catch, and you can catch it easily, and then they'll throw a handful of pencils at you and say catch, and you drop most of them, and it's like, well, if you try and get too many messages out there at once, they're not going to remember them, but if you hit 1 or 2, it should be interesting to see where that sweet spot is on the advertising. So the final thing I wanted to talk about is, obviously Facebook has been in the news a little bit lately about all of their privacy scandals and whatnot. Now, one of the things we've talked about is how people who work in this industry are sort of aware of how much data is collected on consumers, but people who are not in the industry are kind of shocked. Experian in particular seems to freak people out. Experian is a credit card company that tracks your credit card purchases and knows and shares it, with your ID stripped out, but nonetheless it's shared. And then they can also figure out your location if you have an app on your phone that allows you to share location, like Facebook or Instagram or something. And we rely, though, as advertisers on all of this data to target ads and whatnot. So what do y'all think is going to happen? I'll sort of narrow that down a little bit. Do you think we're going to start having a whole lot of consumer pushback and an adoption of something close to GDP? The European Union has something called the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulations. Omer, I'll start with you on there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's obviously very timely with everything that's going on with Facebook. And, it's interesting. I think a few years back, the digital ecosystem was really focused on segment-based targeting, sort of profiling and building audience segments. And then in recent years, it's been all about one-to-one. How can we get that one-to-one attribution measurement at the most granular level? I personally think a couple things. One, the EU passing GDPR, it's going to take a little while to sort of pass in the U.S., although I've been in rooms with brands, global brands, that are saying that they're going to institute the GDPR globally just to make it easier and more consistent. So that's a concern, obviously. But, quite honestly, with the government's got so many issues right now, and they can't do anything. Plus, the Facebooks and Googles of the world, I would imagine, spend a few dollars on lobbying. I don't think anything's going to happen in the soonest, maybe in a couple years or more. But that said, when things start to happen, we talk about informed consent as a consumer. I personally think that you're going to have much more of consumers sort of the informed consent, so giving consent, much smaller base of consumers giving consent, and for companies like us, to be able to model off those that have given consent and build segments again, track segments, build segments, so still providing value in the marketplace, even though GDPR regulations might at some point come into play for us as well.
So I'm definitely concerned that Congress can get something done on this topic, and I agree with you. Obviously, Congress has not gotten much, if anything, done in the recent past. But this is one of those areas where they could put up a win by taking some action, because I think it's nonpartisan to go to your base and say, look what we did, look what we accomplished. They were doing spooky stuff. We closed that door, and they're not doing that spooky stuff anymore. Whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, I feel like as a consumer, you could think, wow, that was a good thing, and I think that's something that, could cross the aisle. And I think there are some things that they could close the door on pretty easily and put up a win. I think that they want, a pound of flesh out of Facebook. I think that they're mad, and this is something where, I don't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat in the Congress, you could do something and tell your constituents going into the elections in November. I do think something like GDPR is probably coming to the U.S. I do think that it's kind of an eventuality, because having an industry totally self-govern in this kind of like how we're living today, man, like every company is going to push the envelope and do what they think is allowed within those self-regulations. And so I think there's going to be more government regulations that come into play.
Yeah, and I certainly agree with Omer and Jon just on some of the political environment. I have less of confidence that there'll be something effectively done in light of, what's going on with the midterm elections. I think people should care about data. I think in the end they don't, the average consumer. I mean, it's something that, it's been collected for years. It kind of brings it to light. I think as long as you still give value, and this is, the data is the product, or you are the product, and if you get it for free, I think this blows over. I do think there's some, I would call it incremental regulation. I don't think it'll be sweeping. I don't necessarily think it's as rigid as GDPR, because Europeans always seem to, they do a much better job at really kind of locking down that type of subject. I don't think the U.S. will. And going back to the lobby, I think the tech community and the tech lobby, and particularly if, with what happens in the next election cycle, I think that all pertains.
And I'll just add to that, I think it'll be really interesting. I think is it May 21 or 25 when GDPR is either the 21st or 25th that it goes into being live, and it'll be really interesting for us to see what's happening to some of these companies that are identified as not prescribing to GDPR.
Right. I mean, one of the things I hear from a lot of the people in the industry is that their fear is that Congress, both sides of the aisle, doesn't really understand tech, and so much more so than in the EU. So it's like speaking a foreign language to them. Although, which is why allowing them to regulate it can be tough because they don't understand what they're regulating. Although an easy win would be something that, a lot of times the consent is just buried in, while they do get consent, it's like they're tricking you. And this is something you hear from the blockchain people a lot, that, when you log into something with Facebook, a little window pops up and it could literally say, I give Mark Zuckerberg my firstborn child, and half the people would click on it because it's sort of dense and it goes by and you just want to do it. A lot of other stuff, your phone, your TVs, you give consent the very first time you turn it on. There's a screen that pops up and you're just like, yeah, whatever. And it's often couched in language that's not particularly accurate. It's like to give you better recommendations, not to track you to marketers. And
What I'm thinking of when you mentioned that is the policy.
There's a microphone right next to you.
Testing. Hello.
Turn it on.
Hello.
Just shout.
Okay. But what I was thinking of when you said that is the policy screen that scroll down.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly it. And it needs to, and one of the things that they were talking about for Win is just make make that pretty prominent, make it a separate screen, make it, have pretty graphics on it so you actually understand, yes, I am giving you the right to track me. And to your point, Tom, I don't know that a lot of people will care, but they just kind of want to know, like, I said yes.
Well, and keeping in mind two things. Number one, this Congress rolled back privacy regulations, so if we've kind of gone the opposite direction currently with what's going on in local policy. And the second thing is, I think we typically look at data as strictly kind of a .com, a web thing, but now with connected TVs, more app-based television, Netflix, right? I don't think, at least I think most people don't necessarily discern, that going into the data pool also. So that's by the way, that's a very different experience, a different payoff when you look at and you kind of mentioned the recommendation engines. I mean, a lot of the success of Netflix has been the quality and the power of their recommendations. So
right, and people don't. I mean, that's the other funny thing is people don't often realize that like Netflix recommendations aren't just them being nice, like or Spotify, that they've companies have paid to be higher up in those recommendations, that they've been tracking what you're watching, and that's how they get it, and what your demographics are and all that. It's not just Amazon too. Amazon people don't even realize Amazon puts ads on their homepage.
And product recommendations, and I'd argue we like it. I mean, it makes it easier, and hey, it's a little data to give up, right? And again, I think that's the argument. I think that's where the discussion gets hard, in my view.
Okay, good. And now we're going to turn it over for questions. And I saw a hand. You got a.
I'm sorry, I spaced it. I spaced my thought.
Okay. So thank you guys much. We have a few minutes left. If anybody has any questions for the panel or anything, go ahead. Okay.
What do you think is more effective, physical advertising or digital?
Physical being outside.
Offline?
A billboard or a sign or a person.
I mean,
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think they all have relevance, and it depends on, depends on the category. Auto might be very different from CPG, that might be different from e-com, so I think it's understanding what the category is, but I think they all play value, and that's, again, that's what we're trying to do, is measure all touch points and how they sort of fit within that path to purchase. And some of the offline, if you look at print or out of home or direct mail, people think some of these industries are dying, and I think quite the opposite. With the intelligence that we have today, we can tie those exposures through beacon-type sensors or geolocation. Again, that is all dependent on what happens with GDPR coming to the U.S. That might limit some of those capabilities, but I think there's more relevance than ever for those offline media, including TV now with advanced measurement capabilities.
Yeah, and you try to buy a billboard in a major U.S. city right now, they're all sold out. I mean, it's a hot market. People are looking at it. Location is always strong. Again, I think it's the type of product too. If it's if it's an activation, which again we're seeing activation budgets increase, and we're seeing outdoor stay strong. So I do think, I think there's still a lot of ability, effectiveness, and advertiser and marketer acceptance in those areas.
Yeah, I mean, Netflix just bought a billboard company.
Well, and look, my theory on that is, in Hollywood, when you're trying to recruit producers, when you say you're going to have a billboard with your show on it, on every billboard on the way home, you're going to get that producer, right? That's been done for years, both in the film and the television industry. So I think that was a smart play by Netflix. I think there's a lot of people trying to figure out why would they spend $300 million for an outdoor advertising company just in LA. And to me, I see that as a recruiting tool to get producers to do programming on Netflix so they can sell more subscriptions.
Okay, one last question. Sir, go ahead. Just shout, sorry.
The regulation, I was wondering if y'all can speak more specifically to the actual press there. If GDP light or something like that does come to the U.S., are we talking about a big revenue headwind for the companies that rely on data, or will they have like a workaround for it? What do you think? Like, what are the...
Repeat the question.
Yeah, so he had asked, if we have something like GDPR in the U.S., is it going to hit a revenue headwind for the companies that are in the space, or like what is the ultimate effect of it?
From my standpoint, I think yes, in the sense that if you're a company right now and you're not thinking about GDPR and planning for something, even if it's GDPR light, that's going to be a huge hurdle to overcome. And many companies will go out of business, whether it's in Europe or maybe down the path in the U.S. So from our standpoint, maybe it goes more to a sort of from a one-to-one measurement solution to maybe more of a lift-based measurement solution, where we have these people that give consent and maybe get better recommendations and things like that from tracking them and using them sort of to build models and segments off of.
Yeah, there's some digital advertising companies that chose to exit Europe because of GDPR, because they didn't want to deal with it. So that's certainly for them, like, that's a huge revenue obstacle. Taking Europe off the table, that's a big deal. And they chose to do that. So if something like that comes to the US, it's a very big deal.
Yeah, and I do think the positive of that could be some of the companies in the lower tier that don't kind of deserve a place in the ecosystem fall out, and I do think the level of companies and the quality of that data rises as a result. That's a personal point of view.
Okay, well, thank you, gents, very much, and thank you all for showing up so early on an AB morning.
So I joked the name of your company are two topics that I tried to stay away from in high school.
Speaking with the microphone directly in front of your mouth. Yep, just keep it close. Thank you. That was crazy. Yeah, I know.
Hello, good morning. I'm Gay Bell, and I'm here with Joanna and Jon and Christian to talk about probably one of the hottest topics at the show this week, AR and VR. You only have to walk around the show floor and see the people queuing to get a sort of like feeling of the experience of VR and immersive, to know that, we're onto something that's quite interesting here. There's also, research came out this week from CCS Insight that kind of puts the market at nearly $10 billion just for headsets by 2022. So, with all that, there's just no doubt that there is a demand. But the big question we're going to actually explore together is, can we make any money out of it? Because if we can't make money out of it, then what are we kind of thinking about? There's been too many of those episodes in this industry already. Lots of the content owners have been experimenting. We've seen quite a lot of experiments with museums, events, sort of experiential content. And there's lots of rumors that big content owners are doing some backroom work to really sort of crack how they can use AI and VR to deliver their content. So, Joanna, let me come to you and ask you, what's the word on the street? What are you hearing? What are you experiencing at your sort of end in terms of content owners and their appetite for this?
Hi, I'm Joanna Popper. I joined HP recently, leading up our location-based entertainment for virtual reality at a global level. So I'm part of a new startup-type team we have within HP. So it's a fun opportunity. We're a startup within a huge tech company with a long legacy, and part of the founding of Silicon Valley. And so we have a team that's entirely focused on commercial VR. And within commercial VR, there are 4 segments we're focusing on: healthcare, architecture, engineering, construction, military training simulation, and location-based entertainment, as we see those being the primary sectors where there's either already a big appetite for virtual reality or the appetite's fast growing. And so within that, I'm personally focused on location-based entertainment. I have an entertainment background. I worked at NBC Universal for quite a long time. And so to the answer around monetization, location-based entertainment is one of the main places that many of the content creators are looking to drive their monetization strategies right now for a wide variety of reasons, which I can go into now or later in the panel.
Come back to.
Okay, great. Thanks for having us. Thanks for waking up everyone early in Vegas too. We appreciate it. Nobody looks even tired. It's awesome.
Jon, what are you finding? What are the content owners sort of sharing with you? Are you working with people to actually, sort of explore how you can actually harness this and get a true consumer experience?
Absolutely. The first question when I'm working with big partners, they say, okay, well, how are we going to make money with this, right? In the beginning, it was, hey, let's just do something. Right, because we need to do something or we're going to get fired. But it's getting a little bit past the experimentation phase where people are starting to say, okay, what value does this really drive? And I'm CEO of Seek, which is an augmented reality platform. So we don't do VR, we just do AR. And I think it's probably going to be a little bit easier to make money through AR early on because everybody has a phone in their pocket that can view AR content, whereas VR is still, you got to go wait in a line to go try it out, or you have to, buy some expensive headset to sit at home, connect yourself to a PlayStation or to a computer, and then access that content. And I know that will get better over time, but for now, I believe AR is going to drive a lot more commerce. It's readily available to people in their pockets. There are 2 billion phones out there now that can handle AR Kit, AR Core, different technologies that are now readily available, and so that's going to, I believe, proliferate the amount of content and commerce that's happening within that ecosystem.
Christian, you showed me your product earlier on, actually,
yes.
So I have even more sort of insight into what you're doing, and I know you're working with content owners to explore how you can actually work with this. Tell us a little bit about that and what you're doing.
Yeah, so Christian from SpherePlay, we do virtual reality player solution. I can't say much about what's going to happen next year because of a couple of NDAs in place, but there are some major players.
It's not a fun panel. I'm here to not tell you everything I know.
No, all this to say that over the last couple of years, the requests and, we, as you said, kind of get out of that experimentation phase, and we're getting more and more requests on not only how can I do it, but how is it manageable, how is that going to operate, how can I, make it sustainable and get monetization out of it. And so all this is really, the requests are getting more mature, so that's a good sign that it's outside of just R&D spending. It becomes a real, strategic core or, something sustainable. So very encouraging. Also, what we're hearing a lot more is the label functional VR. So, instead of just VR for the wow or for a stunt, at a festival, we're getting more and more requests on, I want to achieve that goal. I want to increase my shopping cart conversion rate in a retail store. And they use VR as a tool to achieve, an objective that is, that increase their revenue. So in that sense, not only on the entertainment standpoint, but also on the retail, or simply as a tool like video and stereo. It's helpful to sell more products. So.
I think, a lot of the money lies with the advertisers and the brands as well, and, the agencies driving and sort of looking to innovate in the way that they can communicate. The location-based side, I would assume, is very, very much driven by location-based advertising. No. Okay, well, Tell me what it is.
Yeah. So look, what I'm focusing on within location-based, and it's basically anywhere you're doing VR out of home. So that could be a theme park, that could be a VR arcade, that could be a museum, a retailer, pop-up, a cinema. There's lots of those. The Void, Dreamscape, Nomadic, 2-Bit Circus, Zero Latency are good examples. I don't know where you all live, but there's a website called Varnish, VRNISH.com. I don't work for them. It's not a commercial, but if you type your zip code in there, you can find your closest place that you can experience VR. And so those are places where you're either gaming or you're having an entertainment experience. You're one of the Ghostbusters and you go in and you're saving the day, or you go in and you're disguised as a stormtrooper and you're saving the Empire. So typically that's what or you're a badass taking down some robots or zombies. So that's I think more of the location-based entertainment's focused on that. You could call the pop-ups that happen at various festivals location-based, but that's slightly different. So I think that when you're talking about monetization, I think you mentioned a really important part, which is obviously driving your revenues as a company. For the enterprise side, there's also another really important part, which would be decreasing your costs. So you could look at the monetization on that flip side, and there's a lot of enterprises that are using AR or VR training tools to decrease their costs on the factory floor, and so you see double-digit efficiencies for companies like GE and Lockheed Martin and Boeing already. So it's a sort of flip side to the way that we often think about the monetization, but it's a really important point of view on the ROI.
Anything to add, John, on the sort of actual how people are going to make money out of this? How are you going to pay? This is not a cheap experience to create. So how are you actually going to, create an ROI there?
I think that consumers these days want to be completely enveloped in their world. People go nuts for different things, whether it's Game of Thrones or The Office. I've watched The Office for the last 10, 15 years, however long it's been out, and I still haven't gotten sick of it. But the point is, if I'm given more experiences that are more immersive into these different worlds, the entertainment space has been a place where we've had a lot of customers. We've worked with Universal, we've worked with Lionsgate, we've worked with big media companies that say, hey, we want to take this world, whether it's an animated one or a real one, but let's create an AR, a VR experience that can take these people deeper in there. And that brings more customer loyalty, which is going to in turn lead to more sales and more affinity towards the different brands that they're doing. And there are some brands that are doing a really, really good job at putting content out that is short, easy to consume, and but very delightful, right? And I think that right now that's where a lot of kind of the VR type stuff is. Even AR, VR can be crossed at some point. And then the other obvious place that people are making money with AR is being able to bring their products into someone's life. Like IKEA is a great example of someone using AR to drive commerce in a very real way. I can take this couch and use my phone and plop it right there and see if I like it, and if I do, I can buy it and it will show up at my doorstep and I already know what it looks like. That's a very obvious way where if you're a product-based company, you can show people what their life will be like with that product in it through the technology of AR and then drive sales immediately.
Fascinating, actually. When you think about what people can do with products, it's not all about, gaming. It's not all about, sort of fancy headsets. There is actually the opportunity to do real commercial opportunities. What about, sort of the leisure industry? I mean, everyone talks about travel and that sort of thing as, a really sort of big application. Are we seeing that, or is that a promise that is happening yet?
For the travel part, I haven't been much involved in that industry so far, but the words that I'm hearing out there is, it's not going to replace traveling for real. Going to Paris is still going to be going to Paris, but it becomes a tool the same way you would use photos or videos to see, or to plan your trip. Then you can use, still again that same analogy, but the videos on steroid to have a more clearer understanding or picture of where you're actually going to stay. Where is your hotel? Is it it looks well on pictures, but it's in a crappy hood, or you don't want to avoid those mistakes. The more accurate the tool you use to plan your trip, the more satisfied you're going to be at the end of it. So.
We have a question, and I'm happy to take them as we go. So I think the microphone's not even there now, so you're not doing well with microphones this morning.
Do allow them to experience a product before buying it and then to
Your product's not very good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's what I would do if it makes the understanding of the product more accurate. So if the product doesn't fit your need, you better not buy it at all.
Yeah, L'Oreal is using AR to let people try on makeup. I haven't actually tried it because I don't wear makeup very often, but
that's not a product problem.
No, not at all. That's right. But the point is, they try that on, and as soon as they turn the camera off, they're not getting that benefit anymore. So yeah, I mean, AR lets them see what their life could be like with the product, and then they have to still make the purchase to actually make that a reality.
And for certain products, having the ability to sample is very powerful, and so this is allowing you, whether it's AR or VR, anywhere along the MR or XR spectrum, it's allowing you to sample in a more immersive and deeper way. So certainly, if your product's not great, obviously maybe that's not the right medium for you. But when I worked in TV, we used to say the worst thing to do for a bad show is great marketing. But anyway, but if you have a good show, then you would want to do good marketing, right? So same with this. Is that confusing?
No.
Yeah. So I think it's an interesting point, though, also when you think about driving the adoption of VR and anything along the spectrum, because it's really, really important to have that sampling. It's a product that's really hard to explain. It's because it's something that's not like nothing else that you've ever done. And so trying to explain, you go into this headset, it's like you see cool stuff, or you're in a new world, or you take your phone and then you move your finger and you see different directions. It's certainly a product that you really need to sample, which is why you see such long lines, because that's the most exciting way to really understand. It's really hard to understand in any other way than really being in the experience.
Well, it's a bit like television, actually. If you try to explain to someone who'd never seen television what television is, it would be really kind of quite tough as well. And I think if you try to explain that to someone, they'd probably be prepared to pay a lot more for it than we do today. Going back to AR, and I actually do a lot of work in the mobile phone space, and so I spend a lot of time seeing, phones and sort of seeing those experiences, whether it's 180 or 360. I must admit, today I do find, and I don't know if people agree, that just the experience and the quality isn't there most of the time, and you're looking at something that feels like a sort of high school project rather than a professionally produced experience. What's got to be done on the quality side? Surely that must be something that you guys are looking at all the time.
Yeah, part of it is phones aren't as powerful as something like a PlayStation even, or a computer, to be able to display, ultra realistic objects. But it's getting better over time, and I could take a few minutes with me afterwards, and I can show you some experiences that will wow you, that are pretty awesome.
Sample opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. but AR is still pretty difficult to make. One of the things that we're working on at Seek is, and we're releasing in about a month, and I'm not trying to promote this, but we're making a mobile platform that lets people easily create content, right? AR content is really, really hard to create right now, and therefore, because there's only a few people doing it, there's not a lot of competition to, work it up. I don't know if you remember in YouTube used to just be all cat videos, and then, some more professional people started coming in, and then you got people like Devin Supertramp and other, really, good video, and then they started to see competition, and now you see unbelievable videos all over YouTube, and AR will do the same thing as it gets easier to create, right? And so we really believe that as the availability of AR creation tools increases, and we're not the only ones working on that, there's a ton of companies that are trying to do that, that will naturally just improve itself over time.
Christian, I know it's something that you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, definitely. The dilemma of 180 degree versus 360 degrees, it comes with great challenge. A lot of people think that it has to be full 360, but when you stretch a video on the whole 360 degree, it's not all of that scene around you that is necessarily important, and it comes with some technological challenges as well, because you want to crank up the resolution because you're streaming the audience that has no value to the sports event you're live streaming. In our case, in the past, we've worked a lot in the sports industry, and the 180-degree feed seems to be kind of a perfect balance, because first you don't have to get the waivers of all the people in the stands, because if you're starting to consider a production deployment, beyond the prototyping phase, you'll need to get those waivers of all the people in the stands that you can see in the live feed there, and also it's once you remove that, it's a great place to put advertising as well. Also with 180-degree, you don't have the stitching latency. So that brings also an easier on the technological path, and you get better resolution or better quality. So instead of stretching on full 360, you stretch the image only on 180 degrees. So you dilute a little bit less your pixels out there. So the overall quality of the experience is better, and how ready for production is that solution is higher as well.
So I think it's important to underscore that the perspective of a lot of the experts in the field is that this is the next wave of computing. So we're currently in the mobile wave, but the immersive computing or XR wave is the next wave. So when people ask, what are you going to use it for? Anything you're using your internet for right now, you'll probably be using some sort of immersive computing device, plus many things we probably haven't realized are coming in the future. So I think that's important to note that we're very early days in that. The primary high end headsets are all they just had their 2-year anniversary. So that's pretty young in terms of a technology. ARKit, ARCore, the primary AR device. Software, they're about 6 months old. I think that September was the launch for Apple. So if it's not. So the expectation that the content's going to be amazing already is probably a little bit misaligned. It's still early. People are still experimenting. I think there's some really interesting, exciting endemic use cases that have been discovered for this, but there are a lot that haven't yet been really, discovered, or there people are probably working on them, behind closed doors, NDA. They still haven't gotten to market. We certainly know about a bunch of those. So. Comparing the full content experience with film or TV that's had many years to grow and thrive, and so many experts working on it is probably a little bit unfair comparison. But there really are some amazing content experiences in both AR and VR and everywhere along the spectrum. And what makes me super excited is that they're incredibly talented artists and creatives from TV, film, gaming, immersive theater, and engineers all coming together. And so it's like an interesting time to watch the birth of this industry and to really be part of it and get to have such an impact in it. So I don't know, we never found out in the audience if you guys are all working in this space or if you're curious about it, but I'm sure that those of you who are working on it are also really excited about it and having a great time. I was actually talking with a colleague yesterday. We were saying, everyone who's working in this space is super optimistic and excited about it, because if you weren't, you probably wouldn't be. These aren't jobs you kind of just have because you couldn't get a job. It's definitely a fun time with a lot of optimistic and exciting energy in it.
Absolutely, I totally agree. You talk about live quite a bit, and you talk about sports particularly and events. Now, are people actually paying to watch that, or is that being funded by advertising or just brand extension of the content? Where's the equation from the? I'm trying to get us back to the money.
So far, our experience is sponsorship is the main way. It's the Intel event or whatever other big brand out there. But sponsorship starts where sponsorship ends. I mean, it's not a recurring thing. Every year or every project you need to find a new sponsor and to do the sale there. So we're starting to see more and more requests or needs for something more recurring and more turnkey solution that you don't need to go out there. So connecting with ad tech that is available out there to kind of nourish the environment and make it obviously not too overwhelmed with ads out there. But yeah, kind of to move away from the sponsorship only approach and move towards something more that drives conversion, that drives, you see a Reebok commercial, you can buy the shoes right there from the VR experience while watching a UFC fight. That's something that is an example that we show at our booth that has not much lines, but that's an example, yeah.
Well, in location-based, people are actually purchasing tickets, so that you have the monetization of consumers coming to buy. I mean, if you look at some of the other models right now, obviously a lot of content is still VC funded, some is brand funded, some is sponsorship funded, probably a very small percentage ad funded right now. I don't know what other model. There's a model that one company is using where they're bundling the VR experiences into an overall ad package for flat content plus immersive content.
Location-based AR is really easy to monetize. We've been doing it for a couple years. Pokemon Go showed us a great way to do it. They showed that if you put a Pikachu somewhere, people will go there, right? If you put a carrot somewhere, they'll go there. So what we did is we said, hey, we don't own the rights to Pokemon, but we can let these businesses give things away through our platform. So we built basically a Pokemon Go with prizes, right? With real things that people could go to a drink shop and win a $100 gift card if they happen to be lucky. And they would do an AR interaction to get there. They open it up, there's a map. And so being able to drive foot traffic with AR is an obvious way to bring money. And we've worked with a lot of great Six Flags is a great example of someone we've worked with. Basically, we put different interactions all throughout the park, and you had to come into the park in order to participate, but as you went around, you could win free Six Flags tickets and free Cokes and free things throughout the park, whatever, a free sweatshirt if you wanted, but you had to go there and then participate with AR, and they were driving sales, they were getting lots of engagement. We even had brands sponsor that, and so brands were able to get brand impressions and engagements through augmented reality as well. And so I think location-based AR is a very obvious way that's live today that's working well, where people can actually drive legitimate ROI that's trackable.
It's really cool.
It's cool. Yeah, very cool. And it just feels like AR is making that real. We've always talked about sort of mobile location-based advertising. It didn't quite work, the concept that you might get a text message that tells you can get 5p off a McDonald's, but when you actually get the immersive experience of going to get that, it really changes the game. You guys, the two of you are running startups in this space. Running startups and being in a sort of nascent space is not the easiest path to have chosen. Tell us a little bit about how you're getting out there as a startup and actually how you're succeeding as a new player in a very new market.
I can start with that.
We'll have war stories.
Just to put on what Joanna said, pretty sure pretty much everyone in that space is excited about VR, except investors. Those are the one maybe a little bit more worry right now. As we started our company in 2014. We had a chance of being the very first virtual reality mobile app out there. So that generated millions and millions of downloads. So that's kind of how we generated revenues since day one in the company. For the last, I'd say maybe 2 years now, it were more experimental and one-off projects and custom development revenues. And now, since, as I said earlier, the requests and the needs are getting more towards kind of an operation and real distribution of that kind of content. That's why we're kind of evolving our business model to make something like, if we realize that if our clients are not successful, it's not worth charging them too much. So going towards more of a connecting with ad networks and a monetization solution for them, that's what makes more sense to make money down the road.
Yeah, I mean, when people ask us who are your competitors, we say, Blipar, who's raised $100 million, Facebook, Snapchat, You know, I mean, those are the people that we're against in AR, and we have our advantages, they have their advantages, and I won't get into that. But yeah, it's hard. You have to work 120-hour weeks for a couple years. I mean, it's not, and it's still going right now. I think the most important thing, if there's anybody out here who's in a startup or thinking about doing one, it's getting, you have to push so hard to get that first really big customer. Our first really big one was Universal, actually. And after we then could say, hey, we did this for Universal, and then you have to deliver, by the way, right? Don't just get the customer, but you have to actually do something.
It's like having the good product, right?
Yeah, you got to have the good product, or else people aren't going to buy it. So then we got our second one, and then our third one, and then our 10th one, and then our 20th. And so, but it just takes an insane amount of hustle. And the advantage we have against Snapchat and Facebook and all these guys is we're small and nimble, right? We can dart here and there, and this didn't work, but that's okay. Let's go this way. And we only spent, you know, $20,000 trying that out. Whereas if Snapchat tries something, they have to spend $20 million trying it. And if it doesn't work, then they say, oh, and then they have to turn this huge, you know, steamboat to try to figure it out and go through 20 committees. So startups have an advantage because they can find the places where the market isn't getting it right and perfect that solution, and then push it hard to get in there. Find your little wedge and work your way in.
That's great. I mean, startups are exciting, and I think, you know, the whole SPROCKIT environment over there is just, you know, just a great way to sort of see some really lovely innovation.
Agreed.
That's really inspiring. From an HP point of view, obviously, not a startup.
We have a venture. We have a jump venture. Well, I'm in a startup with anyway, so entrepreneurship, but we have a venture arm that does invest in startups.
Yeah, cool. I think I'm getting the nod, so we've sort of filled our time. Have we time for a couple of questions if anyone has any, or do you want us to wrap quickly? So don't leave me hanging now that I've got you the questions raised. Is there a mic or no?
It's not working. Check 1 2 2 2 1 2.
How does 5G technology boost the uptake of sort of VAIR? Yeah.
I think it's crucial to its mass adoption, right? You want the quality to be better, we need 5G. I mean, that's a big component, yeah.
Rainbow Vomit. Snapchat's Rainbow Vomit.
Rainbow Vomit, yeah. I mean, most people know exactly what she's talking about. Snapchat, face filters. Facebook has face filters. But there's so much more to it. I could go on for a long time. The cool thing about what Seek is, we're just an open platform like YouTube. Anyone can publish to it. And so you could just go start browsing experiences and see what's popular and cool and try it out. That's probably the best answer I can give to you right now. Yeah.
You guys demoing?
Yeah, we're over in SPROCKIT. Yeah, so come over and check us out.
On our side, we simply nail down the barriers one by one. So at first it was, the quality and the monetization. So we came up with a solution that fits their need. Then it was a question of production costs. So we came up with some feature that can reduce the production costs at the same time. So, one by one, and then they're out of excuses. So they just say yes.
And most companies want to be thought of as innovative in some way. And the data shows that the majority of consumers think brands that are working with AR and VR are innovative companies. So at the very least, doing some level of experimentation, betas, demos, most companies that want to move towards that future generally are at least open to that, and then maybe need to see more results to keep playing in the field.
Okay, that's great. If you have any more questions, I'm going to encourage you to go over to SPROCKIT and sort of see these guys while they're there, because I'm getting the serious nod now. So
thanks
very much for coming.
Thanks for hosting us.
Thank you so much,
thank you guys. That was great. Really interesting. Good luck with it all.
Ready.
Thank you. Lovely to meet you.